"Get her out of here!" A nurse is yelling that. Not at me, at my husband's mother. She's clawing at the air, trying to get to my dead, and my husband, the same man everyone thought betrayed me, is the one blocking her. I'm sitting there, holding 2 newborns, and for the first time in 9 months, I'm not scared anymore. So let me back up, because 3 months ago, I thought this man hated me. My name is Ijeoma. I'm from Lagos. I moved to Seoul 4 years ago for a job that fell through in the first 6 months, and somehow I never left. Something about the city kept me. The noise, the rhythm, the way nobody looked at me twice on the subway, which honestly felt like a relief after growing up somewhere everybody always had an opinion about you. I met Do-yeon at a language exchange meetup in a basement cafe that smelled like burnt coffee and old paper. He barely spoke to anyone that night, just sat there listening, nodding, taking these little sips of his drink like he was trying to disappear into the wall. When it was finally my turn to talk, he actually looked at me like what I said mattered. Nobody had looked at me like that in a long time. We got married 2 years later. Small wedding. No fancy hall, no orchestra, nothing like what his family usually did. His mother didn't come. That should have told me everything right there. Mrs. O runs 3 private clinics across Seoul. People bow when she walks into a room. Doctors, board members, even a judge once, apparently, at some charity dinner Do-yeon told me about years ago. She built an empire out of politeness and fear, this weird combination that somehow works on everyone around her. And from the day she met me, she made it very clear I did not belong in it. "A foreigner," she said once, not even looking at me directly, more at Do-yeon, like I wasn't standing right there. Interesting. I let it go, for his sake. For 2 years, I let almost everything go. The comments, the silences, the way she'd switch entirely into fast Korean whenever I walked into a room, knowing I couldn't keep up. There was one dinner, our first Chuseok together, where she spent the whole meal talking about a colleague's daughter, Korean, doctor, so accomplished, and never once looked at me while she said it. Do-yeon squeezed my hand under the table, didn't say a word to her though, not one word. I remember thinking, even then, that his silence was its own kind of answer, and I hated how much it hurt. Then I got pregnant. Twins, and that's when the smiling stopped completely. She showed up at our apartment unannounced one evening, sat on our couch like she owned it, crossed her legs, and told me, calm, sweet voice, the kind that makes your skin crawl, that she wanted independent verification of the pregnancy. I laughed. I actually laughed because for one stupid second, I thought she was joking. She wasn't. "Things get complicated," she said, smoothing her skirt, "when there's money involved. You understand." I didn't understand. I still don't, not fully, not even now. What I did understand was this. 3 days later, Do-yeon sat down with her, privately, in her penthouse, and I wasn't invited. I only found out because I went to drop off his forgotten laptop charger and heard them through the door before I even knocked. If it makes this easier, Mother, I don't see the harm in getting it confirmed independently. I stood there, charger in my hand, heart doing something ugly and cold in my chest. He didn't see the harm. I left without knocking, didn't say a single word about it that night. I just started watching him differently after that. Every phone call, every late night, every time he checked his phone at the dinner table and quickly turned it face down. For 2 weeks, small things kept happening. He'd take calls in the other room, voice low. He'd come home late without saying where. Once, I saw a text notification flash across his phone from a number saved only as M. 3 words. Confirmed, moving forward. I told myself it was work. I told myself a lot of things during those 2 weeks, honestly. Anything that let me sleep at night. 15 days after the penthouse conversation, I stayed up after Do-yeon fell asleep, sat on the bathroom floor, back against the tub, phone in my lap, recorder open. I didn't plan to talk. I just started. Hi, babies. It's late. Your appa's asleep. I don't know if you can hear me yet, but I need to say this out loud to somebody. My voice cracked, and I let it crack. I'm scared. I'm really scared right now, and I don't know who's actually in my corner anymore. But I need you two to know something. I'm not going anywhere. Whatever happens, whatever she does, whatever your appa decides to be in all of this, I'm staying for you. Always. I sat there another 10 minutes after that, just breathing, just listening to the pipes tick in the wall, and nothing else. I never told him about that recording. I still haven't, actually. Maybe someday. Okay, real quick, if you're already nervous for me right now, stay with me, because what my husband was actually doing in secret this whole time is about to flip everything you think you understand about this story. I promise you that. Anyway, the next morning I found a folded note tucked inside my prenatal vitamin bottle. Only place I'd look every single day without fail. Only place he knew for certain I'd find it. Trust the process. Please, I need 7 more days. D. 7 words. No explanation, nothing else. My hands were actually shaking reading it standing there in the kitchen in my socks. Trust what process? What was he even doing behind my back? I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to believe him so bad it physically hurt. But then Monday came, and I tried to buy groceries and my card got declined at the register, while an entire line of people behind me watched and waited. I called the bank, standing right there in the checkout aisle, phone shaking against my ear, cashier staring at me like I was some kind of criminal trying to run off without paying. "Ma'am, this account was frozen 3 days ago," the rep said. Way too calm for what that sentence did to my stomach. The primary holder. The primary holder. Do-yeon. I called my lawyer the second I got home, groceries forgotten in a bag by the door. Her name is Grace, one of maybe 2 people in Seoul I actually trusted at that point in my life. She pulled the paperwork within the hour. "Ijeoma," she said slowly, and I could hear papers shuffling on her end. "I'm looking at a filing. It's not finalized, but it looks like separation prep. Joint account freeze, asset review, the whole thing." I sat down right there on the kitchen floor. Didn't even feel my knees hit the tile. "He's a good man," I whispered, more to myself than to her, honestly. "He wouldn't do this. He wouldn't." "I'm just telling you what the documents say," Grace said gently. "I'm sorry." I actually stopped breathing for a second, phone pressed hard against my ear. "He wasn't freezing me out," I said slowly, the pieces sliding into place way too late to feel any comfort. "He was freezing her out." "That's what it looks like from here," Grace said. "I don't have the full picture yet, but that account wasn't built like a separation filing. It was built like a wall. A wall against his own mother." I sat with that for a long time that night, curled up on our couch alone. Guilt hit me first. Guilt for every cold shoulder, every silent dinner, every night I turned away from him in bed without a word or a reason I even gave him. Then something sharper hit me right after. If he was building a wall against her, what exactly was he protecting me from? I didn't get my answer that week, or the next one either. What I got instead was worse. 22 weeks pregnant, I walked into what I thought was a routine appointment at Mrs. O's flagship clinic, Do-yeon insisted, said it would look better for the family if I used their facilities, and stupidly I agreed. And I found her standing in the hallway with two men in suits I'd never seen before in my life. "Ijeoma," she said, sweet as poison dripping slow. "These gentlemen are from the medical board, purely routine." Purely routine did not require two men in suits and a folder thick enough to be a small book sitting there under one of their arms, like evidence for a trial I hadn't even been told I was in. I asked to call my husband. She smiled and said he already knew. He already knew? Something inside me went cold and quiet, the kind of quiet that scares you more than screaming ever could. I sat through 40 minutes of questions that day. Medical history, financial history, questions that had absolutely nothing to do with my pregnancy and everything to do with proving I was some kind of opportunist who trapped her precious son into a marriage he never really wanted. I answered every single one. Steady voice, steady hands, even though inside I was shaking so hard I thought I might be sick right there in that sterile little room. I refused to give her the tears she was clearly fishing for, sitting there watching me like she was waiting for a performance. But that night, alone in the apartment because Do-yeon texted he'd be late, don't wait up, those exact words, cold as anything I'd ever gotten from him, I finally let myself feel it. I sat on our bed and I cried until my whole chest hurt. 2 days after that clinic ambush, I sat in a hospital waiting room by myself. Different hospital, one I picked at random, honestly, just somewhere that wasn't hers. I wasn't there for an appointment, I just needed somewhere quiet that wasn't our apartment, somewhere that didn't have his coat still hanging by the door, or his coffee mug sitting unwashed in the sink from that morning like nothing at all was wrong between us. I sat there for almost 2 hours, didn't call anyone, didn't text anyone, just sat completely still, hands resting on my stomach, watching strangers come and go through those sliding glass doors over and over. I thought about Legos, about my mother's kitchen, the smell of her stew simmering all afternoon, how simple everything used to feel before Seoul, before Mrs. O, before any of this mess my life had somehow become. I thought about leaving, really thought about it, sitting there in that plastic chair, booking a flight, taking my babies somewhere that woman could never reach us, never look at us like we were beneath her. I even opened the flight app on my phone at one point, just looking. Lagos, direct, 3 seats available for a flight in 2 weeks. My thumb hovered over it for what felt like forever. I didn't press anything. I just sat there staring at the price, at the date, at the whole imaginary life it represented, and I let myself feel every bit of how tempting it was before I put the phone face down on my lap. And then I thought about what leaving would actually mean. It would mean running. It would mean letting her win without even making her fight for it, without making her answer for a single thing she'd done. It would mean my children growing up somewhere far away from their father, without ever knowing the full story, without ever knowing if he was who I once believed he was, or who his mother had slowly turned him into over the years. I stood up. My legs felt like they belonged to somebody else entirely, but I stood up anyway, and I walked back out into that Seoul evening, and I went home. Real quick, share this with somebody who thinks they already know how this story ends, because trust me, they don't, not even close. Do-yeon was already there when I got back, standing in the kitchen, like he'd been waiting a while. "We need to talk," he said. "Now you want to talk?" I said. And I heard exactly how sharp it came out, and honestly, I didn't care one bit. "Tomorrow, the legal office. My mother requested a formal meeting, board representative, her lawyers, mine." He rubbed his face with both hands, and for the first time in weeks, he looked exhausted instead of distant, like something underneath him was finally cracking too. "I need you there, Ijeoma." Why? Because it's happening whether you're there or not, and I'd rather you hear it from a room full of people than from a phone call after the fact. I almost didn't go. God, I almost didn't go that morning. But I went. The legal office was cold, all glass and steel, the kind of room built specifically to make regular people feel small and outmatched. Mrs. O sat at the head of the table like a queen holding court, hands folded neat in front of her. Her lawyers on one side, a medical board representative flipping through a thick folder, and Do-Yun standing beside his mother's chair, not mine. Standing beside her. My stomach dropped straight through the floor. "We have a court order," Mrs. O said, sliding a document across the table without even glancing my way, "requiring full medical and financial disclosure before any inheritance provisions can be finalized. The board agrees this is prudent." The representative nodded along like a puppet somebody else was pulling the strings on. I looked at Do-Yun, waited for him to say something, anything at all. He said nothing. He just stood there beside his mother's chair, jaw tight, eyes somewhere I couldn't quite read no matter how hard I tried. That was it. That was the moment I stopped hoping, right there in that cold glass room. She had a court order. She had the board sitting there nodding along. She had her own son standing right beside me instead of beside me. I sat there and I genuinely believed for the first time in this entire mess that I had lost, completely and totally lost. "If there's nothing further to add," Mrs. O said, folding her hands tighter, already halfway to smiling that awful smile of hers, "I believe we're done here." "Actually," Do-Yun said. His voice was quiet, but something about it made every single person at that table stop moving at once, like the room itself had gone still. "There's a lot further to add." He reached down, picked up a briefcase I hadn't even noticed sitting by his chair this whole time, set it flat on the table, opened it slow, like he'd been waiting 3 straight months just to do exactly this one thing. "Mother," he said, "I think it's time everyone in this room saw what you actually built." He pulled out the first folder and set it in front of the board representative. 3 months of audit logs from your flagship clinic's private billing system. He pulled out a second folder. Falsified consent documentation, patient files that don't match actual procedures performed, payments routed through accounts that don't exist on any official record anywhere. Mrs. O's smile was still there, barely, frozen, like it hadn't gotten the message yet that everything around her had already changed for good. "This is absurd," she said, voice rising just slightly. "Fabricated. My own son wouldn't—" "I audited your clinics for 3 months," Do-Yun said, cutting her off, calm and steady in a way I'd genuinely never once heard him from before. Not for the board, for myself, because I needed real proof of what you actually are before I let you anywhere near my children. The room went completely silent. Nobody even breathed. "Do-Yun," I started, my voice barely above a whisper. "I know," he said, glancing at me for just a second, something soft flashing across his face before it hardened right back toward his mother. "I know I should have told you everything. I'm sorry. I couldn't risk her finding out before I had it all." He pulled out a third folder, this one thinner. His hands actually shook slightly as he set it down on the glass table. "This is what you did to Yuna," he said, voice dropping low and rough. "Before Ijeoma, the woman I almost married years ago. You told me she left me for someone else." He looked up at his mother, and I watched something in his face I'd never seen before. Real anger finally let all the way out. "She didn't leave. You made her leave. Same clinic, same fake medical concerns, same board pressure behind closed doors. I found the records last month buried in a system you thought nobody would ever look at again." Mrs. O's composure finally cracked. Actually cracked, right there in front of everyone. Her hand shot out to the table, like she needed it just to stay upright in her seat. "You have no idea what you're doing," she hissed, all that sweetness completely gone from her voice now. "I have every idea," Do-yeon said, "and so does the board now, sitting right there reading every page of it." The representative was already flipping fast through the folders, face going pale, muttering something under his breath about immediate suspension, pending a full investigation. Mrs. O stood up so fast her chair scraped hard and loud against the floor. She lost it completely. She started shouting, not the calm, poisonous voice I was used to hearing from her, but something raw and ugly and unfamiliar, words tumbling out about betrayal, about ungrateful sons, about how dare he do this to her after everything. Two of the lawyers actually stepped back from the table. Someone near the door quietly called security. She stormed out of that office still shouting, and somehow, I still don't fully know how even now, word must have reached the hospital before we even got there ourselves. Because when my water broke that same night, 3 weeks early, right in the middle of all that chaos, she showed up. Which brings us back to exactly where I started. 2 nurses holding her back with everything they've got. Do-yeon standing between her and my bed like his entire life depends on it. Me, sitting there, holding 2 newborns against my chest, completely and finally unbroken. "Get her out of here!" Security finally got to her, pulled her back through the double doors, still shouting something I couldn't fully understand and honestly didn't want to. The room went quiet, that heavy kind of quiet that comes right after chaos finally stops. Do-yeon turned around slowly, looked at me over his shoulder. I looked at him for a long moment, long enough that one of the nurses actually stepped back a little, giving us space without either of us asking for it. "You could have told me," I said quietly. "You would have worried," he said. "I know." His voice cracked slightly on those 2 words. "I'm sorry." I looked down at the babies, 2 tiny faces completely unaware of everything it took just to get them here safely into this world. I looked back up at him. "Come here," I said simply. He crossed the room slowly, sat down beside me on that hospital bed, careful, like he thought he might break something just by sitting too fast. A nurse came back in a few minutes later, quietly checking monitors, pretending not to notice us sitting there in silence. Outside, in the hallway, I could hear muffled voices. Security, maybe, a supervisor, someone explaining something in low, controlled tones. None of it reached us anymore. None of it needed to. Do-yeon reached over and rested his hand gently against one of the baby's backs, barely a touch, like he was still afraid he wasn't allowed to. I watched his face while he did it, watched 3 months of exhaustion finally start to drain out of him, slow, like a held breath finally let go. "They're really here," he said quietly, almost to himself. "They're really here," I said back. Outside the window, Seoul kept going the way it always does, lights and noise, and a whole city that had no idea what had just happened in this small room. I didn't care about any of it. Not the board investigation waiting to unfold over the coming weeks, not whatever was left of his mother's empire, not one single thing beyond this bed, this room, these 2 tiny people, and him sitting beside me. Nobody said anything else after that.
You're highly welcome to this channel to Afro-Korean stories. Have your seats and let us enjoy the story together.